It began, as so many myths of power do, with a vow. In the year 1482, beneath the vaulted ceilings of the Castilian court, Queen Isabella rose from her throne, her face illuminated by the flicker of torches and the expectant gazes of nobles, clergy, and soldiers. Spain was not yet the Spain we know. It was a fractured land, divided by faiths, cultures, and centuries of war. The Reconquista, the long campaign to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule, was nearing its climax. Only one bastion remained, the Emirate of Granada. Isabella, styled La Católica, saw herself not merely as a queen, but as God's chosen instrument. And in that fevered moment of devotion and destiny, she made a promise before heaven. She swore she would not change her linen, the simple white chemise worn beneath royal robes, until Granada fell. It was a vow of humility, an act of penance and prayer. But over the years, legend transformed it into something darker, a symbol of obsession, decay, and a monarchy slowly poisoning itself from within. At first, no one questioned the oath. Acts of penance were part of medieval piety. Monarchs fasted, flagellants bled, priests wore hair shirts. To wear one garment until victory was won sounded austere but noble, proof that even a queen was willing to suffer for divine cause. Her court received it as a gesture of solidarity, a holy offering in exchange for triumph. Chroniclers wrote admiringly of her zeal, and preachers invoked her sacrifice as a living sermon. But as months turned into years and Granada's walls still stood, whispers began to stir in the corridors of Castile. Some called it endurance. Others called it folly. The historical record confirms that the campaign dragged on for a decade. Spain's coffers strained. Soldiers suffered through bitter winters. Granada's defenders held out with defiant courage. Through it all, Isabella's image loomed larger than life, a woman who seemed untouched by fatigue, her faith unbroken, her command absolute. The vow became a legend in itself, whether literal or symbolic, a story retold in monasteries and marketplaces, that the queen had bound herself so tightly to her promise that even comfort, even cleanliness, had become a sin. To understand the power of that legend, we must remember what vows meant in her world. In medieval Spain, a ruler's word was not mere speech, it was covenant. To break an oath sworn before the Virgin was to imperil one's soul and reign alike. In that context, Isabella's steadfastness was seen as sacred courage. But beneath the reverence lay unease. Her vow blurred the line between devotion and extremity. Over time, her spiritual rigor hardened into severity. Letters from the court describe a queen increasingly austere, withdrawn and relentless in enforcing orthodoxy. Mercy gave way to dogma. Ritual eclipsed reason. As the campaign stretched on, her court began to reflect her intensity. Courtiers adopted her restraint. Servants spoke of endless prayers and fasts. Her household became a monastery as much as a palace. And while historians today doubt that Isabella literally wore the same garment for a decade, the story's persistence reveals something deeper about perception, that her reign became synonymous with sacred suffering. She embodied the idea that pain purifies, that endurance redeems. By 1491, as the siege of Granada reached its final phase, Spain itself was transforming. Years of war had drained resources but fed a national identity rooted in faith and conquest. Isabella's unwavering presence inspired soldiers and terrified enemies. The oath, true or apocryphal, became a rallying cry. Her resolve mirrored the kingdom's obsession with purity, both spiritual and political. When the last emir surrendered in January 1492, the queen was hailed as a living saint. Chroniclers described her as radiant, her eyes alight with divine triumph. The vow, they said, had been fulfilled, but history, unlike legend, is never so clean. The conquest that united Spain also sowed seeds of expulsion and intolerance. That same year, Isabella and her husband Ferdinand signed the Alhambra Decree, ordering all Jews to convert to Christianity or leave the realm. It was a decision that shattered centuries of coexistence. Thousands fled, carrying their faith across seas. Others remained, baptized under duress, living as conversos under suspicion and scrutiny. Historians still debate the Queen's motives. Some see religious conviction, a desire to forge unity through faith. Others see political calculus, a move to consolidate authority. Perhaps it was both. What is clear is that Isabella's private vow had become public policy. What began as self-denial evolved into national orthodoxy. A queen who saw purity as salvation built a state that treated difference as disease. The legend of her unchanging garment, though exaggerated, symbolizes that transformation. It reflects the way inward obsession can project outward, how the rituals of one ruler became the blueprint for a culture of control. In time, devotion hardened into doctrine, and doctrine into law. The same impulse that bound Isabella to her linen-bound Spain to its pursuit of religious conformity. The decades that followed brought glory and grief in equal measure. Under Isabella's reign, Spain became a global empire. Columbus's voyage, financed in part by her treasury, opened the Atlantic to conquest and colonization. Gold and silver flowed from new worlds to old, enriching Spain's coffers but entangling it in wars and debts. The Inquisition, already active, expanded its reach, interrogating faith, policing identity, and defining purity by persecution. The queen who had vowed humility became the symbol of imperial destiny, yet the personal toll was immense. Contemporary accounts describe Isabella in her later years as weary, unwell, yet unyielding. She saw her suffering as sanctification. Modern historians, reading between the lines, have suggested possible ailments, chronic illness, exhaustion, perhaps the toll of stress and repeated childbirth. But beyond speculation lies the broader truth. She believed endurance itself was divine duty. Even after her death in 1504, her legend refused to fade. Chroniclers reshaped her image, polishing severity into sanctity. Artists painted her serene and luminous, not the austere figure described by those who served her. Statues rose in her honor. Streets bore her name. The vow, once whispered with unease, became retold as proof of holy strength. The grotesque turned glorious. The human became myth, yet history, as it often does, leaves cracks in marble. Letters and memoirs from her court reveal fear and silence behind ceremony. Advisors tread carefully. Servants learned to mask discomfort. Faith had become a stage, and all were actors. Even her daughter, Joanna, remembered by later generations as La Loca, carried the burden of that inheritance. Whether her madness was hereditary, political, or exaggerated by rumor, it spoke to the shadow of a mother whose piety became a prison. In the centuries since, scholars have tried to peel back the legend. They've studied Isabella's policies, her letters, her alliances, and the contradictions of her rule. What emerges is neither monster nor saint, but a complex, formidable woman shaped by her era's fears and faith. Her vow, whatever its literal truth, symbolized the tension between devotion and dominance. She believed she was purifying her kingdom. In doing so, she also purified it of dissent. Modern historians interpret the legend of her linen not as fact, but as allegory. It reveals how easily private zeal can become public creed. Isabella's Spain offers a lesson that still echoes, that faith untempered by compassion can consume both ruler and realm. By the end of her life, she had accomplished what no monarch before her had, the unification of Spain under one crown and one faith. She had financed voyages that redrew the world and policies that reshaped civilization. But her triumphs came entwined with tragedy. The vow she made in humility became a metaphor for control, self-imposed at first, then imposed upon millions. And yet, like all great historical figures, Isabella resists simple judgment. She was both visionary and ruthless, devout and destructive. Her legacy, like her vow, is a paradox, an act of faith that sanctified empire, a prayer that justified conquest, a queen who sought salvation and left behind an empire haunted by her holiness. Centuries later, as historians sift through archives and relics, her story continues to divide opinion. Some praise her as the mother of Spain, the architect of its golden age. Others see in her reign the origins of intolerance that would darken Europe for generations. Between those poles lies a woman whose life embodied the contradictions of her time, a ruler who believed that purity could heal a world divided, and in pursuing it fractured it further. Her chemise, if it ever truly remained unchanged, has long since vanished. But its memory endures as symbol, not of filth or fanaticism, but of how ideals can outgrow intention. It reminds us that power sanctified by purpose is the most seductive and dangerous form of rule. Isabella's empire rose on unity, but that unity came at the cost of diversity, curiosity, and dissent. Her vow may have ended with Granada, but its shadow stretched across oceans and centuries. The tale of Isabella's unchanging linen survives not because it is literally true, but because it tells a deeper truth about humanity. It is the story of how conviction can curdle into control, how sacrifice can sanctify suffering, and how history, like linen left too long unwashed, can cling to us with the weight of what we choose to forget. So the next time her statues gleam beneath Spanish sunlight, remember what lies beneath the gold and marble. A woman of extraordinary strength and tragic flaw, whose vow for victory became an empire's creed, and whose silence still echoes in the stones of Granada,